Sign the agreement. You have exactly 1 hour, or this situation gets significantly worse for you.
They came into the hospital room without a warrant, without a knock, and without a single word of explanation. A badge was flashed. A folder was dropped on the bedside tray like it was a bill being collected. The girl in the bed, still wearing an IV line in her left arm, still breathing through the bruised quiet of what she'd survived, was told she had 1 hour to sign, or else. She didn't sign, and the man with the badge, the man who thought fear was a language every girl like her already spoke, he had no idea who was standing just outside that door. What happened in room 214 of Harrowfield General Hospital on a Tuesday morning in October would eventually reach the ears of 3 state senators, a federal oversight board, and a journalist who had spent 11 years waiting for exactly this kind of story. Before any of that, before the hearings, before the headlines, before the moment that reduced a man in a tailored suit to someone who could barely hold his own hand steady, there was just a 17-year-old girl named Camille Osei sitting up in a hospital bed, deciding in the space of one long breath whether she was going to be afraid. She decided she wasn't. That decision would change everything. Harrowfield General was the kind of hospital that smelled like industrial cleaner and cafeteria coffee, and something underneath both of those smells that you couldn't quite name, something chemical and tired, the scent of a building that had been trying too hard for too long. The hallways on the second floor were painted the particular shade of sage green that someone in the 1980s had decided was calming and no one had bothered to repaint since. The linoleum was buffed to a low shine. The overhead lighting was the fluorescent kind that made everyone look slightly unwell, which, in a hospital, wasn't entirely inaccurate. It was the 3rd week of October, and outside the windows of the East Wing, the maple trees along the hospital's perimeter road had gone fully golden orange, the kind of color that looked almost artificial, too vivid, too burning, against the flat white of an overcast Midwestern sky. The wind moved through them in slow, indifferent waves. Leaves drifted down in clusters and caught on the window sills, just pressing there against the glass, going nowhere. Inside room 214, the heating system clicked and hummed in a low, irregular rhythm, like a metronome slightly out of tune. The room held 2 beds, one curtained off and empty, the other occupied by Camille. The morning light came through the Venetian blinds in pale, striped bands that fell across the blanket at her feet, across the food tray she hadn't touched, across the small paper cup of pills that the morning nurse had left with a gentle "take these when you're ready, sweetheart." The 4 bag above her head was almost empty. The monitor beside her beeped its slow, steady count. Proof that her heart was working. Proof that she was still here. There was a plastic chair beside the bed that still held the dent and warmth of someone who'd been sitting in it all night. A pair of women's reading glasses on the side table. A half-finished cup of gas station hot chocolate gone cold. Someone had been here. Someone had stayed. But for this particular Tuesday morning, for this particular hour, Camille was alone. She was sitting up against the raised back of the hospital bed, her knees drawn to her chest, a worn paperback held open in her hands. She wasn't reading it. She was staring past it, out the window, watching the maple leaves move. Her hair was braided back loosely, a few strands escaping. There was a healing cut above her left eyebrow. A bruise at her jaw, fading now from purple to the dull yellow-green of old damage. Her eyes were steady. Serious. The kind of eyes that people sometimes described as too old for her face, though what they usually meant was that those eyes had absorbed things that no one should have had to absorb. She heard the footsteps before the door opened. She recognized them immediately as the footsteps of someone who expected rooms to clear for them. She did not clear. The door to room 214 opened without a knock. Two men stepped in. The first one was tall, close to 6'2", in a charcoal suit that was just expensive enough to announce that he bought his clothes with the expectation that you would notice. His name, Camille would learn later, was Agent Dale Forsyth **, though he introduced himself only as Forsyth, Department of Civil Compliance. His hair was silver blonde and precision cut. His jaw was the kind of jaw that had spent decades being set with authority. He held a manila folder under one arm like a weapon in its holster. The second man was shorter, younger, nervous-looking, a junior associate of some kind, carrying a briefcase and glancing at the door the way people glance at exits. Forsyth looked at Camille the way some men look at a stop sign, as an obstacle, not a person. He set the folder on her bedside tray. He did not ask how she was feeling. He did not look at her for line or her bruise or the healing cut above her eye. "Camille Osei," he said. Not a question. She kept her eyes on him. "Yeah. You filed a complaint with the Harrowfield County Housing Authority 4 days ago." "I did." "And you made statements to a reporter from the Sentinel Star." He opened the folder. "A Ms. Deandra Marsh." "I talked to her," Camille said. "She asked me questions. I answered them." Forsyth pulled a single sheet of paper from the folder and placed it on top. He smoothed it flat with 2 fingers. "We need you to sign this." Camille looked at the paper. "Didn't touch it." "What is it?" "A voluntary retraction of your complaint and your statements to the press. It's standard procedure in cases where a minor has made allegations that may have been," he paused, choosing the word with the care of someone choosing a tool, "premature." The fluorescent light hummed. The monitor beeped. "Premature," Camille repeated. "Given your age." "Given the circumstances." "Given the circumstances," she said slowly, and her voice was entirely, completely level. "You mean given that I'm still in the hospital?" "Given that emotions run high in difficult situations," Forsyth said, "and that statements made in that context may not accurately reflect." "What I saw was what I saw," Camille said. "I wrote it down the same night. Before the ambulance even came." A short beat. "You were in distress." "I was," she said. "I was also accurate." Forsyth's jaw shifted. A small, almost invisible adjustment. He reached forward and tapped the paper. "If you sign this document voluntarily, the Department of Civil Compliance is prepared to consider the matter closed. Your family's housing situation," Camille's eyes went sharp, "would be reviewed with additional care and attention. The outstanding maintenance violations that have been cited against your family's unit could be." "Are you threatening me with my housing?" "I'm describing the landscape of the situation." "I'm 17 years old," Camille said. "And I'm in a hospital bed. And you're standing there telling me that if I don't sign a paper that says I was wrong about what I saw, what I saw with my own eyes that my family might lose their apartment." "No one said anything about." "That's what you said." Silence. The junior associate shifted his weight. He looked at the floor. His briefcase handle made a small squeaking noise as his grip tightened on it. The door to room 214 was still open behind them. The hallway outside was not empty. There was a nurse named Greta Salinas who had stopped her medication cart 2 feet from the doorway. She had been about to knock. She stood there now, very still, listening. Her face had gone through 3 separate expressions in the last 30 seconds and was currently settling on the 4th, which was fury. Down the hall, near the nurse's station, an orderly named Marcus Webb 23 years old, 6 months out of community college, first real job, had looked up from his clipboard. He couldn't hear the words clearly from where he stood, but he could hear the tone. He knew that tone. He recognized it the way you recognize a song in a different language. You don't need the words to know what kind of song it is. Back in the room, Forsyth composed himself. "Miss Osei," he said, and his voice had shifted, quieter now, more controlled, the way a fire gets more dangerous when it stops making noise. "I want to be very clear with you. This is an administrative process. It is not personal. You are a young woman who has been through something difficult, and I have every respect for. You don't even know my name," Camille said. He stopped. "You called me Camille Osei like you read it off a file. You came in here without knocking. You didn't ask how I was. You didn't look at," she gestured at her face, at the bruise, at the cut above her brow, "any of this. You put a paper on my tray. You haven't said please once." A longer silence this time. Forsyth looked at her. She looked at him. And here, right here, was the moment. This was the moment that witnesses would later describe in different ways. She didn't flinch. Or she just looked at him. Or, in the words of Nurse Greta Salinas, who would repeat this version at least a dozen times in the months that followed, she looked at him like she was reading him. Like she was reading every single page of him, all at once, and she wasn't scared of a single word. Forsyth blinked. It was a small thing. Involuntary. But it was a blink, and what it contained, what lived inside that fraction of a second, was something that looked, to everyone watching, like uncertainty. Like a man who had walked into a room expecting one thing and found, instead, a completely different thing. A thing he did not have a form for. A 17-year-old girl with a bruised jaw and an four in her arm who was looking at him like he was the one who needed to explain himself. He straightened his jacket. "I'll give you some time to review the document," he said. His voice was still controlled, but it was controlled the way a lid is controlled over a pot that's already boiling. "We'll be back in 1 hour." He picked up the folder, left the paper on the tray, and turned toward the door. "Agent Forsyth," Camille said. He stopped. Did not turn around. "I'm not signing that." He stood there for a moment. Just stood there, facing the hallway. And then he walked out. The junior associate followed him, fast, not making eye contact with anyone. He nearly walked directly into Nurse Salinas's medication cart. He said, "Sorry, excuse me, sorry," and kept moving. Greta Salinas watched them go down the hall. Then she looked into room 214. Camille had picked up her paperback again. She was still not reading it. Greta pushed her cart to the doorway and said, quietly, "You doing okay in there?" baby. Camille looked up. Can I use your phone? She said. Mine ran out of battery. Greta handed hers over without a second's hesitation. Camille dialed a number from memory, a number she had memorized years ago, in the same way you memorize a fire escape route, because it was the number you called when things went sideways, and waited. 2 rings. 3. Then a voice that was warm and low and carrying just the edge of someone who had been awake since dawn said, "This is Celestine Osei Hartman." "Aunt Sally," Camille said, and for the first time all morning, her voice changed. Just slightly. Just enough to show the seam. "I need you to come to the hospital." A pause on the other end. A short one. "Tell me what happened. Tell me everything." And Camille did. What happened next, what Celestine Osei Hartman did in the 3 hours following that phone call, would not be clear to Dale Forsyth until it was far, far too late to do anything about it. Rewind. Not days, years. Go back 5 years, to a Tuesday in early spring. Camille is 12 years old, and the story begins where most stories begin, in the ordinary. The Osei family lived in Unit 4C of the Dunmore Terrace apartment complex on the east side of Harrowfield, in the part of town that the city's promotional brochures somehow never photographed. Dunmore Terrace was 4 buildings, 80 units, and 1 parking lot that flooded every spring when the storm drain by the back gate clogged with debris, and no one at the property management company answered the work order for 3 weeks. The buildings were red brick and tired. The stairwell smelled like other people's cooking, which, on good nights, when Mrs. Adeyemi on the 2nd floor was making jollof, was actually a beautiful smell, and on bad nights, when the ventilation backed up, was significantly less beautiful. Unit 4C had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with a window that overlooked the parking lot, and a living room that had been furnished so carefully, so deliberately, that it looked like a magazine cover if you knew what you were looking for, which most people didn't. A gallery wall of framed family photos above the couch. A woven Kent cloth runner across the coffee table. A bookcase that took up most of one wall, packed tight and organized by subject, fiction, history, science, philosophy, because Nana Osei, Camille's grandmother, who had come to the United States from Accra in 1979 with $40 and a nursing degree that it took her 4 years to get recognized, believed with absolute and unshakable conviction that books were the only luggage worth carrying. Camille's mother, Adwoa Osei worked double shifts at Harrowfield Memorial's cafeteria kitchen, not the same hospital she'd later find her daughter in, which was a fact that carried its own particular weight, and came home most nights after 9, smelling like dish soap and exhaustion, but she always came home. Always said good night. Always asked Camille what she'd read that day. Anything good, she'd say, dropping onto the couch, shoes still on, just for a minute. I'm reading about the civil rights movement, 12-year-old Camille said once. For school, but also because I wanted to. Those things are allowed to be the same reason, her mother said. Nana Osei was the one who got Camille to school. Nana was 71 years old and moved with the particular slow dignity of someone who had been moving fast for 50 years and had decided, on some specific, private morning, that the world could wait for her now. She walked Camille to the bus stop every day. They talked the whole way. Camille asked questions and Nana answered them with the kind of directness that some adults performed for children, and Nana simply was. Nana, what do you do when someone is unfair to you? Which kind of unfair? The kind where they think you don't matter. Nana considered this for a full block. Then she said, you look them in the eye. You tell them the truth. And you don't let them make you small. Not 1 inch. But what if they're bigger than you? I have been small my whole life, Nana said, and I have never been small. Camille understood this. She wrote it in the marble notebook she kept in her backpack, on the page where she also wrote other things worth keeping, quotes she'd read, things she'd noticed, things she didn't want to forget. The notebook was black and white speckled, and by the time she was 17, she was on her 7th one. Those notebooks, those 7 notebooks, would eventually matter more than anyone could have anticipated. But that comes later. For now, Camille at 12, growing up in 4C, doing her homework on the kitchen table while Nana watched the news and quietly added her own commentary. This man is lying through his teeth. Camille, write that down. Always notice when someone is lying through their teeth, reading by flashlight after bedtime, going to Dunmore Elementary and then to Harrowfield Middle and then to Harrowfield High, where she joined the school newspaper in 9th grade and started writing things that made her teacher, a slight, bespectacled man named Mr. Anand Kapoor, stop and read them twice. This piece, Mr. Kapoor said once, holding up Camille's article about the housing maintenance crisis at Dunmore Terrace, about how 12 families had been without consistent hot water for 3 months, and how the property management company's responses ranged from dismissive to absent, is not a student newspaper article. Camille blinked. Is that bad? No, Mr. Kapoor said. I mean, it's a real article. Written by a real reporter. I'm going to send it to someone. Who? He smiled. Someone who will know what to do with it. He sent it to Deandra Marsh at the Harrowfield Sentinel Star. Deandra Marsh wrote back the same day. This, too, would matter. Everything connects. But first, there is another thread to follow, a thread that exists in a very different part of Harrowfield, in a very different kind of building, where a woman named Celestine is getting ready for a very different kind of Tuesday. Asterisk across town. 6:45 in the morning. 14 miles west of Dunmore Terrace. Asterisk. The offices of **Osei Hartman Legal Advocates ** occupied the top floor of a converted Victorian on Meridian Avenue, the kind of street that had been gentrifying slowly for so long that no one could quite remember what it had been before. The building was painted a deep slate grey with white trim. The signage outside was understated, dark green lettering, no flashy logo, because ** Celestine Osei Hartman ** believed that if people needed to look you up, they'd look you up, and if you needed a flashy sign to bring people in, you were probably not the right lawyer for the people she wanted to represent. Celestine was 44 years old. She had a face that people described as arresting, not conventionally beautiful in the way that magazines meant when they used the word, but arresting in the sense that once she was in a room, you were aware of her. She wore her natural hair close-cropped and always wore the same 2 earrings, small gold loops that had belonged to her mother, to Nana Osei, which meant they were, by extension, the same earrings that had been on the ears of the woman who had walked Camille to the bus stop and said ** I have been small my whole life and I have never been small. Celestine was Adwoa's older sister. Camille's aunt. and the relationship between Celestine Osei Hartmann and the family in Unit 4C of Dunmore Terrace was one of those family relationships that is defined by love so total and so practiced that it has long since stopped needing to announce itself. She'd paid for Camille's school uniforms when Adwoa's shifts got cut. She'd driven 3 hours round trip to attend Camille's middle school graduation because Adwoa couldn't get the day off. She called every Sunday at 8 in the morning, which Camille had complained about. "Aunt Selly, I'm in high school, I sleep on Sundays," until she stopped complaining about it and simply started looking forward to it, which she would never admit. "How's my favorite niece?" "I'm your only niece." "Lucky me," Celestine would say, dry as toast, which was her version of warmth, and Camille had learned to read it like a native language. On this particular Tuesday morning, the morning that Camille was in room 214 of Harrowfield General, Celestine was at her desk by 6:30, which was not unusual. She kept hours that her staff described as concerning and she described as deficient. Her desk was organized with the systematic precision of someone who had spent years locating crucial information in the worst possible moments and had decided that chaos was simply a form of disrespect for the work. 2 computer monitors. A yellow legal pad with handwritten notes in a compact, diagonal script. A large thermos of black coffee, no sugar, no milk, no exceptions. A framed photo at the corner of the desk, Camille at about 8 years old, missing her 2 front teeth, wearing a too large Easter dress, laughing at something completely off camera. Celestine had taken the photo herself. She kept it there not for sentiment, which she would have denied, but because, as she once told a colleague who'd asked about it, that child has never once been afraid of joy. I like having that in my peripheral vision when things get hard. That Tuesday morning, Celestine was working on 2 simultaneous cases. The first was a discrimination suit against a Harrowfield landlord, *** Vantage Property Management ***, which operated 40% of the affordable housing units on the east side of the city, including Dunmore Terrace, for a documented pattern of delayed maintenance responses in predominantly Black and Latino housing units versus their West Side properties, where response times averaged 48 hours versus the East Side's documented 22 days. She had been building this case for 8 months. She had 14 clients. She had hundreds of pages of maintenance logs, work orders, response records, and photographs. She had a hearing scheduled for the 3rd week of November. The second case was newer, only 4 days old, and had landed on her radar through a source she trusted, Deandra Marsh at the Sentinel *, who had called Celestine late on the previous Friday evening and said, "Celestine, I need to tell you about something that happened, and I need you to listen to all of it before you say anything." Celestine had listened. And after Deandra told her about the incident, about the girl who'd filed the complaint, about the witness statements, about the photographs, after all of that, Celestine had said, in a voice very quiet and very still, "Deandra, that girl is my niece." A long silence on the phone. "Celestine." "I know." She set her coffee cup down. "I know." "Don't." "I need to think." She had spent the weekend thinking. Strategizing. Making calls. Pulling strings she'd spent years accumulating. She had not yet called Camille directly, partly because Adwoa had said Camille needed rest, and partly because Celestine needed to know exactly how solid the ground was before she walked anyone else onto it. She knew about the complaint Camille had filed. She had read the draft of Deandra's article. She had begun, quietly, to build a parallel documentation file. She did not know about Agent Forsyth. She did not know about the folder. She did not know about the visit to room 214 that Tuesday morning. Until her phone rang at 9:17, and she heard her niece's voice, 17 years old, steady as stone, but with that one small fracture in it that Celestine had heard exactly 4 times in her life, and each time it had meant asterisk something real is happening asterisk, saying, asterisk Aunt Sally, I need you to come to the hospital. Asterisk. Celestine was out of her chair before Camille finished the sentence. She was already reaching for her coat, already calculating the drive, already reaching with her other hand for her phone to call her paralegal, a sharp, meticulous young woman named Priya Ramachandran and saying, before Priya even finished saying hello, I need you to pull everything we have on Vantage Property Management and the Dunmore Terrace maintenance files. I need the name of every Department of Civil Compliance officer assigned to the East Side housing portfolio in the last 2 years. I need it in 40 minutes. Done, Priya said, which was why Celestine had hired her. Celestine hung up. Looked at the photo on her desk. The 8-year-old Camille, mid-laugh, fearless. Okay, baby, she said softly, to no one, to the photo, to the general direction of the hospital 14 miles east. I'm coming. She walked out of the office. The door closed behind her. The thermos of coffee sat on the desk, going cold. 40 minutes later, Celestine Osei Hartman pulled into the Harrowfield General parking lot with a thick manila folder in her passenger seat, a fully charged phone with 3 attorneys already on standby text, and 17 years of building a practice that was specifically designed for exactly this kind of moment. She did not know yet that Agent Dale Forsyth was still in the building. She was about to find out. Meanwhile, back inside Harrowfield General. The same morning. 40 minutes after Forsyth's visit to room 214. Dale Forsyth did not leave the hospital after leaving Camille's room. He went to the vending machine alcove at the end of the second-floor hallway, bought a black coffee in a paper cup, and stood there drinking it with the flat, controlled focus of a man running calculations. The junior associate, whose name was Trevor Yount 26, 18 months out of law school, still learning how this worked, stood beside him and said nothing, which was one of the few intelligent things Trevor had done all morning. Forsyth was not panicking. Forsyth did not panic. He had been in the Department of Civil Compliance for 19 years, and in those 19 years he had managed was the word he used internally, like it was a neutral, administrative term, approximately 412 complaints, disputes, and advocacy actions that threatened the interests of the organizations his department had been contracted, quietly and indirectly, to protect. He had learned the architecture of pressure, where to apply it, how much, and on whom. A 17-year-old girl with a bruised face and no legal representation should have been simple. She had not been simple. He replayed it. The paper on the tray. The refusal. The way she'd looked at him. He did not typically notice the way people looked at him, because he had spent 19 years engineering situations in which the way people looked at him was fear, compliance, or the specific defeated blankness of someone who had decided that resistance was too expensive. He had not been looked at the way Camille Osei looked at him in a very long time, possibly ever, and he found that he was still thinking about it in a way that suggested it had gotten somewhere underneath his professional surface, which was not a comfortable place to have anything. He drank his coffee. He thought about the next move. There were options. There were always options. The girl was a minor. Her statements to the *Sentinel* had not yet been published. Deandra Marsh had been sitting on the piece for 4 days, which suggested she was waiting for something, which was interesting. The complaint filed with the Housing Authority was on record but had not yet triggered a formal investigation. If Forsyth could get that complaint reclassified, moved from the investigative queue to the administrative review queue, which was a technical distinction that meant, practically speaking, it would sit in a database for between 6 and 18 months without a single active step taken, then the girl's testimony would exist without a framework. Without a structure. A tree in a forest with no forest around it. The Housing Authority contact, a man named *** Regional Supervisor Gerald Colton ***, 61 years old, 15 years in his role, deeply careful about his pension, was someone Forsyth had worked with before. Not explicitly. Not on the record. But Forsyth had made certain calls in certain situations, and Colton had responded to those calls in ways that were technically within his discretion and technically impossible to trace as coordination. Colton was not a corrupt man, exactly. He was a careful man. A man who had learned to read which direction the wind was blowing and to position himself accordingly. Forsyth reached for his phone. He called Colton's direct line. It rang twice. "Gerald," he said. "It's Forsyth." A pause. The particular pause of someone recognizing a caller they recognize but weren't sure they wanted to pick up for. "Dale. What's going on?" The OSE complaint. Unit for C, Dunmore Terrace, filed last Friday. I need it moved to administrative review. Silence. I'd have to have a reason on record. You have discretion over queue assignment, Forsyth said. Completeness of documentation. It's in your guidelines. The documentation looked complete to me. Gerald, Forsyth said, the same quiet tone he'd used in Camille's room. The same fire that goes more dangerous when it stops making noise. The complaint was filed by a minor who was in the emergency room when she filed it. There's a reasonable question of capacity and completeness. You have the authority to hold it for a secondary review period. I'm asking you to use that authority. Another pause. Longer this time. What's this about, Dale? It's about managing a situation before it becomes a larger one. Is Vantage involved? I'm calling as a procedural matter. Is Vantage involved? Colton said again. Flatter. Harder to read. Forsyth set down his coffee cup. The department is aware of several outstanding regulatory questions across multiple properties managed by Vantage. Moving this complaint into administrative review while those questions are being evaluated is a reasonable, defensible step. A very long pause. I'll look at the file, Colton said finally. Appreciate it. He hung up. Trevelyan was looking at him with the expression of someone who was deciding whether what he'd just heard was normal procedure or something else. Forsyth looked at him steadily until Trevor looked away. We'll go back to the room in 40 minutes, Forsyth said. Give her time to think. Trevor nodded. What if she still won't sign? Everyone signs eventually, Forsyth said. Or they don't need to. He picked up his coffee. Either way, the outcome is the same. He said this with the casual confidence of someone who had seen it work that way 396 times out of 412. He did not know that this was number 413. But here is the part of the story that Forsyth didn't know, the part that had been quietly building for months before he ever walked into room 214. The part that would make everything he'd done in the last 40 minutes not just useless, but evidence. For days earlier, on the Friday evening that Camille had filed her complaint and spoken to Deandra Marsh, a woman named Priya Ramachandran had been sitting in the offices of Osei Hartman Legal Advocates, working late, going through the maintenance records for Dunmore Terrace. And in those records, buried in a folder of scanned work orders from 2 years prior, she had found something. A document that appeared on the Dunmore Terrace records but that matched, almost word for word, a document from a second property managed by Vantage, a property on the west side, where the tenants were mostly white and the maintenance complaints were typically resolved within 48 hours. The document was a form letter. A form letter that Vantage used when responding to maintenance complaints that they had designated, internally, in their own records, as low priority. The form letter was designed to look like an active response. It acknowledged the complaint. It assigned a tracking number. It promised follow-up within the standard administrative window. It did not promise a specific date. It did not assign a specific worker. It was, in practice, a non-response dressed in the clothes of a response. A delay that wore the costume of action. The West Side property had 3 of these letters on file. Dunmore Terrace had 47. Priya had printed both sets, highlighted the matching language, and placed them side by side in a folder with a note in her neat, precise handwriting, *systematic. Documented. Provable. She had given this folder to Celestine on Saturday morning. Celestine had spent Saturday and Sunday reading it, annotating it, adding to it from 8 months of her own compiled records, building it into something that was no longer a housing complaint from a minor. It was a pattern. It was a practice. It was a paper trail that went from Vantage Property Management's internal communications through their external form letters through their response records through their maintenance logs, and it documented, clearly, specifically, page by page, a 2-year practice of deliberately deprioritizing maintenance requests in East Side properties while fast-tracking identical requests in West Side properties. It was the kind of documentation that, in the right courtroom with the right judge and the right jury, had a specific name. Discrimination. And the morning that Forsyth visited Camille's room, the morning he called Gerald Colton and asked him to bury a housing complaint, was the same morning that Celestine Osei Hartman was driving 14 miles across Harrowfield with that documentation folder in her passenger seat, because her niece had called and said "I need you to come." Forsyth thought he had 1 hour. He did not have 1 hour. He had 22 minutes. Because in the parking lot of Harrowfield General, Celestine was already getting out of the car. At the same time, across town, on the other side of the hospital, in the administrative wing *. There was one more piece moving into place that nobody in that building had anticipated. Deandra Marsh, the *Sentinel * journalist, 43 years old, 11 years covering civil rights and housing issues in Harrowfield, the journalist who had been sitting on Camille's story for 4 days waiting for the right moment, had received a phone call that morning at 8:15 from a source inside the housing authority. The source said, "Someone just called Colton. Told him to move the Osei complaint to administrative review." Deandra said, "When?" 20 minutes ago. Deandra said, "Can you document that call?" A long silence. "Then, I can pull the log." "Pull the log," Deandra said. "And send it to me." She hung up. She looked at her editor, Marcus Stringer ***, who was sitting across the desk from her eating a breakfast sandwich and trying very hard to look like he hadn't been listening to every word. "We're running the piece today," Deandra said. "I thought you wanted to wait for the—" "We're running it today," she said again. "I need a photographer at Harrowfield General in 30 minutes. Deandra, if the complaint is going to be buried." "It's not going to be buried," she said. "Not if we run it before they get the paperwork through." She was already putting on her coat. "And Marcus?" "Call legal. We're going to need them on standby." Marcus set down his breakfast sandwich. "How big is this?" he said. Deandra was already at the door. "Bigger than the story I wrote," she said. "I'll call you from the parking lot." She drove toward Harrowfield General. Celestine Osei Hartman was already in the elevator. Dale Forsyth was standing in a hallway vending machine alcove, finishing his coffee, thinking he still had options. Everything was moving toward the same room. Harrowfield General Hospital. Second floor. Room 214. Tuesday morning, 10:12 a.m. 42 minutes had passed since Forsyth left Camille's room. He had given her 1 hour. He was early by 18 minutes, because he had decided, in the flat, tactical part of his mind that operated like a thermostat, turning up or down based on room temperature, that returning early would disrupt whatever resolve she might have built. Coming back before she expected him was a specific technique. It communicated something without words, **, I set the schedule. I hold the clock. **. He came back down the second-floor hallway with Trevor Yount at his heels and his folder under his arm, and he was about to raise his hand and push open the door to room 214 when a voice behind him said, calmly and with perfect clarity, "I wouldn't do that, if I were you." He turned. Celestine Osei Hartman was standing 10 feet away in the hallway. She was wearing a dark blazer, a white button-down, and the expression of someone who has been practicing for a moment for a very long time and is entirely unsurprised to find herself in it. She was holding a folder. Larger than Forsyth's. Beside her was Priya Ramachandran, carrying a second, equally thick folder and a laptop bag. Behind them, half visible past the corner, was Nurse Greta Salinas, who had positioned herself near the medication cart with the specific stance of someone who has decided they are a witness. "Who are you?" Forsyth said. "My name is Celestine Osei Hartman," she said. "I'm an attorney. I represent the 14 families currently involved in a civil discrimination action against Vantage Property Management, which is the company that manages Dunmore Terrace, where my client and her family live." A pause, perfectly timed, a pause that had weight. "Camille Osei is also my niece." The hallway was very quiet for a moment. Trevor Yount made a small sound. He caught it before it became a word, but the sound, a kind of involuntary intake of breath, hung in the air between all of them. Forsyth's face did not change. He had too many years of practice for his face to change on command. But his right hand tightened slightly on the folder, and his jaw shifted, that same small adjustment, the same one Camille had noticed, and Celestine saw it. "You came to my niece's hospital room this morning," Celestine said. "Without a warrant. Without her guardian present. She is a minor under the laws of this state. I'm here in an administrative capacity. You attempted to coerce a minor patient into signing a legal retraction document by implying a direct threat to her family's housing stability." Celestine took 2 steps forward. Her voice was not raised. "That is not administrative capacity. That is witness intimidation. And I would like to know," she tilted her head slightly, "whether you made a phone call this morning to Regional Housing Supervisor Gerald Colton." Forsyth's face went very still. "Because if you did," Celestine said, "and if that call was recorded in the supervisor's call log, which it would be, because the Housing Authority uses an automatic logging system for all incoming calls to registered officer lines, then what you have is a documented sequence, an attempted coercion followed by an attempt to suppress the complaint that the coercion was designed to neutralize." In the same morning, within 45 minutes of each other, she stopped. She let that land. She let it land the way you set down something very heavy, carefully, completely, so it doesn't move. "Agent Forsyth," she said, "I'm going to ask you to step away from that door." For a moment, just a moment, Dale Forsyth stood in that hallway and did not move. Not because he was deciding whether to fight. He had 19 years of decisions behind him, and he could feel, in this particular moment, the exact weight of all of them. He could feel the specific texture of a situation that has passed the point where the next move is yours to make. He stepped away from the door. Celestine nodded, once, briefly, and walked past him. She pushed open the door to room 214. Inside, Camille was sitting exactly where she had been sitting since morning, knees to her chest, paperback in her hands, eyes on the window. She turned when the door opened. She saw Celestine. For just a beat, the smallest beat, the composed, level, 17-year-old who looks at men like she's reading every page of them dropped. And what was underneath it was a kid. Just a kid who'd had a hard night and a hard morning, and who was very glad to see the one person who could always find the calm inside a storm and hold it out for everyone else to use. "Hey, Selly," Camille said. "Hey, baby," Celestine said. She walked to the chair beside the bed and sat down. She put her hand over Camille's. "You okay?" "Yeah." Camille glanced at the door, at the hallway beyond it. "He came back early." "I know." Celestine squeezed her hand once. "He's not going in that room. Not today." Camille exhaled. It was a long exhale. The kind that had been waiting for permission. In the hallway, Forsyth stood and said nothing. Trevor stood beside him and said nothing. Greta Salinas watched them both from behind her medication cart. She had pulled out her personal cell phone and had been holding it, just holding it, visibly, since Celestine arrived. "You recording something?" Trevor said, finally, to Greta. The bravado of someone who has run out of other options. Greta looked at him very calmly. "I'm sending a text," she said, "to my charge nurse. About a situation on the second floor that she needs to be aware of." She looked at Forsyth. "We have protocols for uninvited personnel in patient rooms. Want me to explain them to you?" Forsyth said nothing. "I'll take that as a no," Greta said. Outside the hospital, in the parking lot, a car pulled in. A woman got out. She was carrying a camera bag. Deandra Marsh had arrived. 3 hours later. The hospital's family conference room, first floor. 1:30 p.m. Celestine had requested the room through the hospital administration, politely, specifically, with the phrasing of someone who knows exactly how to ask for things in a way that makes it very difficult to say no, and the hospital administration, having been made briefly aware of the situation on the second floor by a charge nurse who had been made aware of it by Greta Salinas, had agreed with unusual speed. The conference room was neutral territory. A long table, padded chairs, a whiteboard, a window overlooking the parking lot. It smelled like conference rooms always smell: paper, dry erase marker, the ghost of someone's lunch. At the table, Celestine, Priya, Camille, in a wheelchair, still IV-free now because the nurses had cleared her morning dose, still in hospital clothes but sitting up with her notebook in her lap. Deandra Marsh, who had come in from the parking lot and been briefed in a 7-minute conversation in the hallway that left her expression cycling rapidly between professional composure and something that was much harder to compose. Greta Salinas, off shift now, still in scrubs, present as a witness and, as she put it when Celestine asked if she'd be willing to stay, because I didn't go into nursing to watch someone try to bully a child in a hospital bed. Across the table, Dale Forsyth, Trevor Yount, and a third person who had not been in the building that morning but who was here now, called in by hospital administration, sitting with the particular stillness of someone who understood that their presence at this table was being recorded, Dr. Hannah Morrow Director of Patient Advocacy at Harrowfield General. The documentation was on the table between them. All of it. Celestine's folder. Priya's supplementary file. The printout of the Housing Authority call log, which Deandra's source had sent at 11:15, showing an incoming call to Gerald Colton's registered officer line from a number registered to the Department of Civil Compliance's East Side Field Office, timestamped 9:52 a.m. 43 minutes after Forsyth's visit to room 214. 11 minutes after Camille had called Celestine. There were also, spread across the table in a neat row, 6 photographs. Photographs that Deandra Marsh had received from Camille on Friday evening, taken on Camille's phone in the days after the inciting event, photographs of conditions at Dunmore Terrace that had been documented in maintenance complaints and met with those 47 form letters of procedural non-response. Mold on bathroom ceilings. A collapsed section of hallway flooring in the stairwell between the 3rd and 4th floors, patched with plywood and a taped-down warning sign. A broken furnace in the basement that had been under review for 3 months heading into winter. A leak under the sink in Unit 1A, Mrs. Adiemi's unit, the unit below the one with the jollof that smelled like something good on good nights, that had been running for 6 weeks and had buckled the kitchen flooring. The photographs were quiet but they were loud. And there was one more thing. The one piece of documentation that Celestine had not mentioned to Forsyth in the hallway. The one she had been saving. Camille's notebooks. Not all 7 of them. Just 3. The 3 from the last 2 years, in which Camille, 17-year-old journalist, 9-time school newspaper author, protege of Deandra Marsh, had documented, in her careful, compressed, completely readable handwriting, every maintenance complaint filed by every family in Dunmore Terrace that she was aware of. Dates. Response times. The actual language of the form letters. The comparison she'd done herself, sitting at the kitchen table, Nana adding her commentary, working from public records she'd requested under the state's open records laws, between Dunmore Terrace's response times and those of 2 comparable Vantage-managed properties on the west side. A comparison she'd done, the earliest entry said, because Mr. Kapoor told her to follow a story wherever it goes, and the story went here. The notebooks were not legal documents. They were not court exhibits. But they were specific, dated, corroborated, and they were written by a minor who had maintained this documentation for 2 years before anything went wrong, which made the premature and emotionally compromised minor's statement's framing of Forsyth's retraction document somewhat more difficult to sustain. Celestine placed them on the table. She said, "I'm not here to threaten anyone. I'm here because my niece was threatened, in a hospital room, while she was recovering from an injury she sustained because of conditions at a property your department has a regulatory relationship with. And I want to know, Agent Forsyth," she looked at him steadily, "whether the Department of Civil Compliance is going to respond to this morning's events voluntarily or whether we're going to need to have a different conversation about how this gets handled." And Dale Forsyth, who had 19 years, and a charcoal suit, and a jaw that had been set with authority for so long it had become structural, Dale Forsyth looked at everything on that table. He was quiet for a very long time. The conference room. 1:47 p.m. It started, oddly, with Greta Salinas. She had been sitting quietly near the window, hands folded in her lap, off-duty and present as a witness and seeming, to anyone who didn't know her, like someone who was simply there in a supporting role. But Celestine had spoken to her in the hallway before the meeting began, and Greta had said yes to something specific. When Celestine nodded at her, a small nod, almost invisible, Greta reached into her scrubs pocket and pulled out her phone. She set it on the table. She unlocked it. She turned it to face the center of the table. "I want to play something," she said. "If that's all right." Dr. Hannah Morrow, the patient advocacy director, looked at Celestine, who nodded. Dr. Morrow said, "Go ahead." Greta pressed play. The audio that came out of the phone speaker was slightly tinny, slightly uneven, the way recordings made on a personal cell phone always sound, real, in other words. Not polished. Not prepared. Real. It was the recording from that morning. From room 214. Greta's shift had started at 6. She'd been 2 feet from the doorway of room 214 at the exact moment Forsyth pushed it open without knocking. She'd had her phone in her hand, she'd been about to check a text from the night nurse about medication handoffs, and when she saw what was happening, she had, without deliberating very long about it, simply started recording. She was not sure in that moment that what she was doing was going to matter. She was not sure what the law was, exactly, in terms of recording in hospital hallways, which is why she had texted Celestine's number, the number Camille had given her from Greta's own phone an hour earlier, at 9:48 a.m., while Forsyth was down the hall at the vending machine, and asked a one-line question, asterisk if I have a recording from this morning, is it usable, asterisk. Celestine had called back in 40 seconds. Explained the one-party consent doctrine. Explained what could and could not be said about it depending on the forum. Then said, keep it. Don't delete it. Don't share it with anyone except me. Greta had kept it. Now it played in the conference room. The audio was not perfect, but it was clear enough. You could hear Forsyth's voice, that controlled, not quite warm, I set the schedule tone. You could hear him say asterisk sign this star. You could hear him say asterisk your family's housing situation would be reviewed with additional care. Asterisk you could hear Camille say, asterisk are you threatening me with my housing, asterisk. And then you could hear, in the silence that followed, the particular quality of a silence that contains more than silence. The silence of a room where a man in a charcoal suit has just said something to a 17-year-old girl in a hospital bed that he cannot unsay. The silence of a thing being committed. The recording ran for 4 minutes and 11 seconds. When it ended, the conference room was very quiet. Trevor Yount's hand was flat on the table. It was very still, the way your body goes still when you're trying not to let it show that your heart is pounding. He was 26 years old and he had been in this job for 18 months, and in 18 months he had done a great number of things that his law school ethics professor would have had strong feelings about, and sitting in this room right now, listening to that recording, he was having a great number of feelings that he was not sure he had words for yet. Forsyth had not moved. Celestine waited. Then Priya slid a printed document to the center of the table. The call log. This is the log of a call made from the Department of Civil Compliance East Side Field Office number at 9:52 this morning, to the registered officer line of Housing Authority Regional Supervisor Gerald Colton. The call lasted for minutes and 30 seconds. She placed a second sheet beside it. This is the Housing Authority's internal system log. It shows that the Osei family complaint, filed 4 days ago, assigned to the active investigation queue, was flagged for secondary review reclassification at 10:08 this morning. 16 minutes after the phone call. She placed a third sheet beside the second. This is the public advocacy file documenting 17 additional cases in which families in Vantage-managed properties on the east side of Harrowfield filed maintenance-related complaints with the Housing Authority that were subsequently reclassified to secondary or administrative review. 9 of those 17 cases were filed after documented contact between Vantage property management representatives and officers of the Department of Civil Compliance. She looked at Forsyth. We have been building this file for 8 months. Forsyth looked at the papers. Dr. Hannah Morrow, the patient advocacy director, who had come to this meeting expecting a conflict resolution conversation between an agent and an upset family, and who was now sitting at a table with what appeared to be documented evidence of a coordinated effort to suppress housing discrimination complaints through regulatory interference, said, very carefully, Agent Forsyth. I'd like to understand how a patient advocacy concern at this hospital connects to the Department of Civil Compliance's regulatory relationship with a private property management company. Forsyth said nothing. Because it seems to me, Dr. Morrow continued, that this hospital received an unannounced visit from your office, to a minor patient's room, in which that patient was asked to sign a legal document without the presence of a guardian or legal counsel. And I am going to need your department to explain that visit in writing to our patient rights office by the end of business today." She said it with the precise, contained firmness of someone who manages a hospital and has learned that the most powerful thing she can do in any room is be very specific about what she wants. Forsyth still said nothing. Then Camille, who had been sitting with her notebook open on her lap and a pen in her hand, taking notes, actually taking notes, the way she had been taking notes for 2 years, because Mr. Kapoor said follow the story wherever it goes, said, without looking up from the page, "I have something too." The room looked at her. She reached under the notebook. She slid a folded piece of paper across the table. Not toward Forsyth. Toward Celestine and Dr. Moreau. "When I filed my complaint last Friday," Camille said, "I asked the clerk at the Housing Authority if she could tell me whether other families had filed similar complaints about Dunmore Terrace before mine. She looked up. She could only give me the numbers, not the names. I know that's confidential. But she told me there were 11 complaints on file from that address in the last 2 years. 11. She looked at Forsyth. And I looked up the response records on the ones that were public record. 8 of them had been moved to secondary review. One of them was filed by Mrs. Adeyemi in Unit 1A. She's been in that building for 23 years, about a water leak under her kitchen sink. That complaint is 14 months old. Nobody's fixed the sink." She looked at him steadily. "Mrs. Adeyemi is 68 years old," Camille said. "She walks with a cane. She has to cook every day with a bucket under her sink because that's just how things are now. That's just her life. And she filed a complaint and it got moved to secondary review and nothing happened and she didn't come to the hospital because she didn't have something bad enough happen to make someone care." Camille paused. "I came to the hospital because something bad enough happened to me. And you came here to make sure it didn't matter." The room was absolutely still. Greta Salinas looked at the table in front of her. Her jaw was tight. Trevor Yount, 26 years old, 18 months out of law school, was looking at Camille. He was looking at her the way you look at something that has just reoriented you. He had a particular expression on his face that was the expression of someone whose certainty about what they were doing had just stopped being a certainty. And Dale Forsyth, Agent Dale Forsyth, 19 years in the Department of Civil Compliance, 412 managed situations, 396 signatures, looked at a 17-year-old girl in a hospital gown with a bruised jaw and a marble notebook in her lap. And very slowly, very visibly, something in his face shifted. It was not one thing. It was several things happening in a compressed span of seconds. A kind of recognition. Not of who she was in the legal or procedural sense. Something more fundamental and more uncomfortable than that. Recognition of the fact that he had come into this girl's room and talked to her the way he'd talked to her. That he'd stood at her bed and said the things he'd said and done the things he'd done, and she'd been sitting there with a bruised jaw and an full line, and she'd been 17 years old, and she'd looked at him. She'd looked at him the way she was looking at him now. And he had blinked. And he had thought, in the vending machine alcove afterward, that it was a small thing, a momentary crack in his composure, nothing. And sitting here now, looking at this documentation, listening to his own voice on a phone recording saying * your family's housing situation *, he understood that the crack had not been in his composure. It had been in something else entirely. He put his hands flat on the table. He said, "I need to," and then he stopped. He started again. "I need a moment." No one gave him one, exactly. But no one spoke. Which amounted to the same thing. Deandra Marsh had her notebook open. She was writing. She had been writing since the recording ended, and what she was writing would eventually be the lead of the most significant piece she'd published in 11 years, a piece that would run the following morning with the headline *, The Paper Trail, How One Teen's Hospital Complaint Exposed a Decade of Housing Discrimination on Harrowfield's East Side *, but she was also, underneath the journalist, a person. A person who had received a message from a 15-year-old named Camille 2 years ago through a teacher named Mr. Kapoor, and had written back the same day, and had spent the last 2 years watching a kid learn to follow a story wherever it goes. Room. She said, clearly, in front of the room, that he had agreed to provide testimony in the ongoing civil case that her aunt was building, and that the testimony he was providing was going to help document a pattern that affected not just Dunmore Terrace but 17 properties across the East Side, and that she did not think of him as a good person or a bad person right now. She thought of him as someone who had made a different choice than the one he'd been making, and she thought that was worth noting because it suggested that people could. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then someone in the back started clapping. Then someone else. Then Nana Osei, in the third row, who did not applaud theatrically but placed her 2 hands together and made the solid, steady sound of someone who means it. The formal outcomes of that evening took shape over the following weeks. The civil discrimination case against Vantage Property Management moved forward with Forsyth's testimony as a key piece of corroborating evidence. The case settled, not as quickly as Celestine would have liked, which was her honest assessment of settlements generally, but it settled for an amount and with terms that included a mandated audit of all maintenance response records across all Vantage-managed East Side properties, independent oversight of maintenance request processing for a period of 3 years, a formal agreement to bring all outstanding maintenance orders across Dunmore Terrace into compliance within 90 days, and a financial fund, the ** Dunmore Terrace Resident Relief Fund ** established at Celestine's insistence, to compensate the families who had been harmed by the documented delay pattern. 47 families. Not just the 14 in the original suit. 47. Gerald Colton at the Housing Authority resigned. Whether this was his choice or was made structurally easy for him through conversations above his pay grade was something that Celestine described, in her measured way, as less important than the systemic review that followed his departure. The Housing Authority conducted an internal review of its complaint queue practices and issued new procedural guidelines specifically restricting the discretionary reclassification of active complaints without documented written justification, reviewed by a second officer. Dale Forsyth left the Department of Civil Compliance. He did not go quietly and he did not go publicly. He submitted a formal resignation that cited, in the careful, precise language of a man who had spent 19 years learning what language could and couldn't carry, an irreconcilable conflict between the department's operational practices and the public interest mandate of its charter. He was 51 years old. He had savings. He had 2 children. He had a great deal of thinking to do, and whatever he did with the rest of his life, no one in that story was responsible for organizing it for him. Trevor Yount stayed. He called Celestine's office 2 weeks after the hospital meeting. He asked if there were any positions at Osei Hartman Legal Advocates, because he had been thinking, since that Tuesday in October, about what kind of lawyer he wanted to be, and the answer had become increasingly clear to him. Priya interviewed him. She called Celestine afterward and said, "He's green but he's serious. He sat through 40 minutes of me describing case documentation and asked better questions at the end of it than most first-year attorneys I've seen." Celestine said, "Hire him on a 6-month trial. If he's still asking good questions in February, we'll talk." He was. They did. And finally, not finally in the sense of last, but finally in the sense of permanently, there was the *** Nana Osei Advocacy Fellowship ***. Celestine's idea. Named, over Nana's protests, "I don't need my name on anything, Celestine, I have never wanted my name on anything," and Nana's eventual quiet acceptance, for the woman who had walked her granddaughter to the bus stop every morning and said the things worth saying. The fellowship was a program, administered through Harrowfield High School in partnership with the **Sentinel** and Osei Hartman Legal Advocates, that provided 2 annual stipends for student journalists pursuing public interest and community advocacy reporting. The stipend was modest. The mentorship was not. Fellows were paired with a professional journalist from the **Sentinel**, had access to the resources of Celestine's Office for legal questions related to their reporting, and presented their work at an end-of-year public showcase. The first 2 fellows were selected in January. The inaugural advisory letter that went out to Harrowfield High students, written by Deandra Marsh, because Camille had asked her to write it and Deandra had said yes before Camille finished the sentence, included one line that was quoted in the **Sentinel**'s coverage of the program. The most important thing a journalist can do is write down what is true, in the room where it happened, before anyone can tell them the room was empty. Under the letter, in a box, was a quote from Camille Osei, inaugural fellow, and it said explicitly, because Celestine had insisted on accuracy, the person who had started it all. The quote was, "I wrote it down the same night. Before the ambulance even came. 1 year later. October. A Tuesday. Harrowfield High School's newsroom, a converted storage room on the 2nd floor of the main building, with 2 desktop computers, a printer that jammed if you printed anything larger than 11 inches, for folding chairs, a whiteboard covered in headlines and notes, and a window that overlooked the east side of the building and, if you craned left, the roofline of Dunmore Terrace 6 blocks away, was a small room. It did not feel small. It felt like the center of something. On the first Tuesday of October, 1 year after the Tuesday at Harrowfield General, the school's student newspaper, the Harrowfield High Herald **, which had gone from a 4-page monthly to an 8-page monthly with a functioning website under the editorial leadership of its new editor-in-chief, a junior named Toby Adeyemi who was the grandson of Mrs. Adeyemi in Unit 1A of Dunmore Terrace, who had had a working kitchen sink since February, was holding its editorial meeting. There were 7 people in the newsroom. 5 students. Toby at the whiteboard, writing and erasing in alternating bursts. Mr. Anand Kapoor in the corner, still in the same slightly too large cardigan he'd been wearing for 6 years, still with the same wire-rimmed glasses, still twice reading everything handed to him, who was the faculty advisor. And 1 guest. The guest was sitting in the 4th folding chair, knees to her chest, old habit, with a notebook in her lap and a pen behind her ear, watching the editorial meeting with the expression of someone who finds this specific environment deeply, fundamentally comfortable. Camille Osei was 18 now. She'd been admitted to the Mercer University School of Journalism, full scholarship. She had received the letter on a Saturday and called Celestine at 8 in the morning, which was fair, Celestine said, because that was the time Celestine usually called her. She was here today not as a student but as the Nana Osei Advocacy Fellowship's inaugural fellow, returning at the fellowship's annual invitation to speak to the new student journalists about what she'd been doing and what she'd learned and what the thing she'd been doing for 2 years had felt like from the inside. She talked for about 20 minutes. It was not a speech. It was a conversation, the way the best things of that kind always are. She answered questions, she asked some back, she was honest about what had been hard and specific about what had been worth it. At one point, Toby Adeyemi said, "Were you scared?" In the hospital room. Camille thought about it. Genuinely thought about it, not the way you perform consideration for an answer you've already prepared, but the actual considering kind. Yes, she said. Not of him. Of the thing he was representing. The idea that what I'd seen and written didn't matter because of who was telling it. That's a scary idea. She paused. But I had the notebooks. I had the records. I had 2 years of doing the work. So when he put that paper on my tray, I could be scared of the idea and still know that the idea was wrong. And that's the point. That's why you document. So that when someone tells you the room was empty, you have 17 notebooks full of proof that the room was full. 7 notebooks, Mr. Kapoor said mildly, from his corner. 7, Camille agreed. I me-counted. I'm on 9 now. A ripple of laughter in the small room. One of the students, a sophomore named Jade Mbeki 15 years old, already writing pieces that made Toby look at them twice, said, "Do you think about that morning a lot?" The hospital. Sometimes, Camille said. Mostly I think about the room. About being in a room where you know the truth and someone is trying to tell you you don't know what you know. She looked at Jade. You'll be in that room a lot if you keep doing this. The thing that gets you through it is knowing why you went into the room in the first place. Why did you? Jade said. Camille thought about her grandmother, in a navy coat, walking a 12-year-old to a bus stop, saying I have been small my whole life and I have never been small. She thought about the gas station hot chocolate gone cold. The gold earrings. The 7 notebooks, now 9. The 7 notebooks she'd carried since 6th grade because she wanted to write down things worth keeping. Because the truth was there, she said. And I wasn't willing to just walk past it. After the meeting, Camille walked the 6 blocks from Harrowfield High to Dunmore Terrace. She'd told Adwoa she'd be by for dinner. Her mother had started cooking on Tuesday evenings, a new development of the last year that coincided with her shift schedule improving, which coincided with a second income from the part-time administrative role she'd taken at the Housing Rights Coalition, which coincided with the settlement, and she wanted to stop in and see Nana first. She went up the stairs, no longer held together with plywood and warning tape. There'd been a full stairwell repair in August, and knocked on the door of Unit 4C. Nana opened it. She was smaller than Camille remembered, or maybe it was just that Camille had gotten taller, or both. She was wearing her sweater, the house sweater, over a blouse, because October was starting to bite and old habits lived in old bones. But the apartment was warm. The heating system had been serviced twice this year, both within the standard 48-hour response time, and it showed. "There she is," Nana said. "My name on a plaque." She said this with the specific dry tone that she reserved for the fellowship, which she still objected to nominally and secretly loved entirely. "You love it," Camille said. "I am indifferent," Nana said, and stepped back to let her in. The apartment smelled the way it always smelled, the Kent cloth on the coffee table, the books on the shelves, the specific domestic warmth of a home that had been lived in with intention. Camille sat on the couch. Nana sat in her chair. The TV was on in the background, the news, which Nana always watched and always annotated. "How was the school?" Nana said. "Good. There's a sophomore who's going to be better than me in about 2 years." Nana nodded. "Good," she said. "That's how it should work." They sat for a moment in the particular comfortable silence of two people who don't need to fill the quiet. Then Nana said, "You know what I thought about this morning?" "What?" "That bus stop. When you were small." She looked at Camille. "You used to ask me questions the whole walk. Every single morning. What do you do? What do you do? What do you do?" You never ran out of questions. "I still don't," Camille said. "I know," Nana said. "That's the right thing." She looked at her granddaughter with the eyes of someone who has seen many things and retained the capacity to see one more clearly. "You still writing everything down?" Camille reached into her bag, pulled out the marble notebook, black and white speckled, current one, number 9. She held it up. Nana smiled. It was a full smile, not a small one. It was the kind that reaches all the way up and rearranges the whole face. "Good girl," she said. "Now put it away and eat something. Your mother's making jollof." "She can't make jollof like Mrs. Adeyemi." "No one can make jollof like Mrs. Adeyemi," Nana said, with great calm. "That is a fact of the universe. But your mother is trying, and you will eat it and you will say it is wonderful." "I will," Camille said. And she meant it. Outside the window of Unit 4C, the maple trees along the perimeter road of Dunmore Terrace had gone fully golden orange, the same particular color as the maples outside Harrowfield General, a year ago to the week. The same burning vivid orange against the same flat white October sky. The same wind moving through them in slow, indifferent waves. But the window was warm. And there was no bucket under the sink. And Nana was not wearing her coat inside. And downstairs, in Unit 1A, Mrs. Adeyemi was cooking something that smelled, even from up here, even through 2 floors of renovated building and repointed brick and repaired stairwells, like something very good. There's a specific kind of quiet courage that doesn't look like courage from the outside. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't ask for credit. It just shows up. It looks like a girl sitting up straight in a hospital bed and saying "I wrote it down the same night." It looks like a grandmother walking a child to a bus stop every morning for years, saying things worth keeping, not knowing which ones the child will carry. It looks like 2 years of marble notebooks, a teacher who sent something to a journalist who wrote back the same day. The truth is, I think most of us have been in that room at some point, the room where someone with more power or more Polish or more certainty tells us that what we know isn't what we know. That what we saw wasn't what we saw. That we are too young, too small, too marginal, too unsanctioned to name the thing we're looking at. And in that room, there is always a moment. One moment. Where you decide. Not loudly. Not heroically. Just, you decide whether or not the truth is worth the discomfort of saying it out loud. Camille decided. She'd been practicing that decision for 2 years without knowing that's what she was doing. And I want to ask you something, and I mean it sincerely. I'm asking because I've been sitting with this story and I want to know. ***, when was the last time you said something true in a room where saying it was uncomfortable? ***. If you're willing, I'd love for you to leave one word in the comments. Just one word describing what it cost you, or what it gave you, to tell that truth. One word. ***, relief. Fear. Worth it. Nothing. Freedom. Lost. ***, whatever your word is. I want to read them. Thank you for being here for this. I know stories like this one ask something of you. They ask you to sit in the discomfort, to stay with it, to let it matter. And you did that. That means something. This channel exists because of people who stay to the end. If you want to be here for the next one, the story of a bus driver in a small Alabama town who stood up in front of a school board meeting and said 11 words that got him fired and then changed everything, I hope you'll subscribe and come back. I'll be here. The truth will be too.